At her height, barely 2 years, one woman occupied Egypt, Syria, Arabia, and part of Anatolia, territory held and governed by her own generals, not granted to her by anyone. Then Rome sent its emperor, personally, to destroy her. Her name was Zenobia, ranked the most powerful women who ever sat on a throne. The names that come up are almost always Cleopatra, Catherine the Great, Elizabeth I. Almost nobody puts a queen from a Syrian desert oasis on that list. So is the title deserved? The more famous Zenobia became, the harder the real woman got to see. Buried under stories added by writers who never met her. To answer honestly, we separate what she actually did, provable in territory, coinage, and stone, from what got added later to make her even larger than life. No ruler builds power from nothing, and Zenobia is no exception. Before there was a queen, there was a city Rome depended on. Palmyra sits at an oasis in the Syrian steppe, on the line separating Roman Syria from Sassanid Persia. Its power came not from a large standing army, but from something more practical. An organized caravan economy running east to the Persian Gulf, connecting goods from India and Arabia to buyers across the Roman Mediterranean. A relay hub, not a direct stop on some single road to China. More than 3,000 surviving inscriptions, many bilingual in Palmyrene, Aramaic, and Greek. They describe a tightly regulated trading society, including the famous tariff court inscription. Duties on everything from oils to luxury textiles arriving indirectly from further east. That wealth built the kilometer-long Great Colonnade and the Temple of Bel, blending Semitic and Greco-Roman architecture. A population, Aramaic, Greek, Arab, tribal, that paid Roman taxes and supplied Roman soldiers, while never fully becoming Roman. This is the inheritance Zenobia would eventually step into. A city already among the richest and most strategically placed in the Roman East. Generations before she was born. To measure her rise, see what she rose out of. By the mid-3rd century CE, Rome was living through the crisis of the 3rd century. More than 20 emperors in roughly 50 years, most killed or deposed. Constant civil war, with frontiers under pressure from Germanic tribes and Sassanid Persia at once. And a currency so debased it had nearly stopped functioning. Then, in 260 CE, Emperor Valerian was captured alive by King Shapur I. Campaigning against Persia, he never came home. The Roman East had no functioning central protection left. Into that vacuum stepped Palmyra, led not by Zenobia, but by her husband. The power Zenobia would later wield didn't start with her. It started with Septimius Odaenathus, already a leading figure in Palmyra. This was when Shapur's army began withdrawing after capturing Valerian. Odaenathus struck the retreating Persians hard, recovering a share of the plundered Roman spoils. Then he turned on the usurpers threatening Rome's own authority in the east. He defeated the pretender Quietus at Emesa. For restoring order when Rome's emperor couldn't, Gallienus rewarded him with extraordinary titles. Dux Romanorum, Corrector Totius Orientis, eventually Imperator. Odaenathus styled himself, in a Persian-influenced idiom, King of Kings. He pushed as far as the walls of Ctesiphon itself, twice, without taking the city. Proof of exactly how far Palmyrene power could now reach. This is the paradox worth sitting with. The empire that later marched to destroy Palmyra is the same empire that elevated it first. Rome needed a strongman in the east badly enough that it built one, and got one of the most powerful regional rulers it had ever authorized. Then, in 267 CE, Odaenathus was assassinated with his eldest son and heir by a relative. The Historia Augusta is a late dramatized source we'll keep running into. Modern scholars treat it with real suspicion. It names the killer as a cousin called Maeonius and claims Zenobia had already been at odds with the succession. She would not accept her stepson as heir ahead of her own children. The text itself does not prove she ordered the murder. Later writers and some modern readings have filled that gap. There is no independent evidence that she did. A rival reading treats the killing as personal revenge. Either way, Odaenathus was dead, and his remaining heir was a child. Someone would have to hold together everything he'd built. Zenobia became regent for her young son, Vaballathus. He inherited his father's titles in name, while she made the actual decisions. Military appointments, diplomacy, and the direction of campaigns through the generals her husband left behind.
This wasn't as improbable a jump as it might look from Rome.
Elite women in Palmyrene society were not politically invisible. Funerary inscriptions and portraits commemorate them by name. Genealogies and property were recorded as carefully as men's. That doesn't prove Zenobia held formal power before her husband's death. The sources are silent on her earlier life. But a capable woman taking real authority after his death was no Roman anomaly. What can be measured rather than assumed is what happened next. Palmyrene forces under generals like Zabdas were soon operating at real scale. Somebody was making consistent strategic decisions at a very high level. And the sources, nearly unanimously, credit that direction to Zenobia. This is the question the title asks, and the answer starts with a map. In 267 CE, she inherited her husband's eastern command, not a four-province empire. Through 269, she tightened that hold, while Rome was too distracted to contest it. The break into open expansion came in 270. That spring, Zabdas moved on Arabia Petraea. At Bostra, he defeated and killed the Roman governor Trassus. Trassus was commanding the 3rd Legion Cyrenaica. The city was sacked. The legion's temple of Zeus Hammon was destroyed. A later Latin inscription records that Rome had to rebuild it. Zabdas then pushed south along the Jordan Valley. Arabia and Judea passed under Palmyrene control. Milestones later carried Vabilathus's name. None of this was yet a declaration of independence. On paper, it was still a regional power, filling gaps Rome was too busy to secure. Then, in 270 CE, Zenobia's forces took the one province Rome could least afford to lose: Egypt. It started with Timagenes, an Egyptian officer who rose in revolt in Zenobia's favor. She answered by sending her most capable general, Septimius Zabdas, with a substantial army. Ancient sources claim roughly 70,000 men against 50,000, numbers likely inflated. But still a serious, coordinated campaign rather than a raid. Egypt's prefect, Tenagino Probus, was away fighting piracy in the Aegean. That left the province exposed. Zabdas won the first engagement and entered Alexandria. Then he left a garrison of about 5,000. That is not a city taken in a vacuum. It is a first victory, a calculated hold, and a gap. Probus rushed back, assembled what loyalists he could, and drove the garrison out. Zabdas returned in force and took Alexandria a second time, with clearer local support. Probus fell back south to the Babylon fortress, near modern Cairo. A position that should have cut the Palmyrenes off from Syria. Timagenes, who knew the local terrain, seized the high ground with a smaller force. He ambushed the Roman rear and captured the position outright. Cornered, Probus took his own life. Zosimus places the invasion in the summer of 270, before Emperor Claudius II died. Some modern scholars, reading the papyrus record, prefer October. Either way, it is 270, not 269, and by year's end, Egypt was Zenobia's to administer. Egypt wasn't just another province. It was Alexandria, the second greatest city in the Roman world. And it was the grain that helped feed Rome itself. A queen from a desert caravan city had taken it without Rome's consent, and without a declared war. A second Palmyrene general, Zabai, joined by Zabdas in spring 271, pushed further still, into Asia Minor, annexing Galatia and reaching, according to Zosimus, as far as Ancyra. Modern Ankara, deep in central Anatolia. Attempts to take Chalcedon, on the doorstep of Europe, failed. That failure is part of the measurement too. The arc had a limit. By 271 CE, the territory under Zenobia's control ran in an unbroken line. From the edges of Mesopotamia through Syria, Arabia, and Egypt into central Anatolia. One comparison worth making carefully rather than glibly. Cleopatra, through the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE, was granted nominal rule over vast territories: Cyprus, Cilicia, Cyrenaica, Syria, with her children titled over Armenia, Media, and Parthia. But those were largely political declarations, backed by Mark Antony's authority. Not land Cleopatra's own administration and army actually held and governed. Zenobia's territory was occupied, garrisoned, and administered by her own generals, without a Roman patron granting it to her. A smaller claim on paper, arguably more solid in practice. One caution worth keeping honest: it would overstate the case to say she cut off all Rome's grain. Egypt's grain was a genuine strategic shock. But a total cutoff claims more than the evidence supports. Grain is recorded as still reaching Rome in 270. The scale was already remarkable without inflating it.
Territory tells you where her armies reached. Coins tell you what she actually claimed to be.
And the story they tell is a genuine escalation, act by act.
Early in 270 CE, coins from Antioch and Alexandria still showed Vaballathus alongside the Roman emperor, with titulature that stayed carefully, deliberately Roman: Vir Clarissimus, Rex, Imperator, Dux Romanorum.
This was not yet a declaration of independence. It was a regime testing how far it could stretch Roman authority. Then, late in 270 or in 271, everything changes. Vaballathus takes the title Augustus. Zenobia takes the title Augusta for herself. A title received by long Roman convention for the reigning imperial family, taking it while occupying Roman provinces in rivalry with a sitting emperor. Rome could not absorb that gesture. The coins that bear her own name stay scarce beside her son's. At Alexandria, tetradrachms in her name were struck at the exact moment the break became real. At Antioch, a small radiate issue followed. Numismatists have noted the imbalance. Her portrait comes from a narrow slice of the mint's capacity. Most eyes kept producing her son, not a flood of currency, a precisely timed political statement.
And one that still presented Vaballathus as the public face of the regime.
No Eastern client ruler had ever put that combination in front of Rome. Augusta, on her own coin, over land her generals actually held. The center was expected to look away.
Zenobia did. That single fact does more to answer how powerful she was than any battle count could. Rome could tolerate a powerful Eastern ally overreaching within its own structures.
It could not tolerate a second Augustus. With those titles, ambiguity ended. A Roman East ruled under Augustus and Augusta, striking its own imperial coinage, was no longer an ally. It was, in every sense that mattered to Rome's survival as one state, a rival empire. That, far more than personal animosity, is what made war unavoidable.
If Zenobia's power is measured by what it took to defeat her, this matters enormously.
Rome didn't send an ordinary general. It sent the one man already proven in barely a year. He could hold a collapsing empire by sheer force of will. Even he couldn't move against Palmyra right away.
Aurelian rose to power in 270 CE after Emperor Claudius II died of plague,
and inherited an empire still coming apart at the seams elsewhere. Before he could think about the East, a Germanic invasion pushed into northern Italy. The first time in living memory, Italy itself had felt threatened by a foreign army. Aurelian defeated it, then turned to a second threat building on the Balkan frontier. Recognizing how exposed the capital now was, he ordered a new defensive wall around Rome. A project so large it wouldn't be finished until after his death. Only once those fires were out, in 271 CE, could Aurelian finally turn east. This is the man Zenobia was actually facing by the time he reached Syria. Not a general fresh to the job, but the most tested military mind Rome had produced in decades. Arriving with a year of proof that he could win wars the empire couldn't previously afford to fight. Aurelian's advance into Syria wasn't a straightforward march into hostile territory. City after city along his route opened their gates without a fight, Antioch among them. Whatever loyalty Zenobia's regime commanded, it hadn't yet had time to become unshakable. For many Syrian cities, Rome still looked like the safer long-term bet. Safer than a queen whose empire was only 3 years old.
That single fact matters for measuring her power honestly.
Zenobia had built something vast, vast enough to worry an emperor, but not yet old enough to have earned unconditional loyalty from the people inside it. Zabdas gathered what forces remained to make a stand near Antioch. The two armies that would decide the fate of Zenobia's empire were about to meet. Near Antioch, spring 272 CE, Aurelian faces Zenobia's core strength directly. Her heavily armored cataphract cavalry, the Clibanarii, riders and horses both sheathed in mail, devastating in a direct charge. In open ground, little in the Roman arsenal could stop them head-on. Their vulnerability was less visible. Full armor, worn for hours in the Syrian heat, exhausted men and horses. The commonly told version comes primarily from Zosimus, writing 2 centuries later, not as an eyewitness. It describes Aurelian's cavalry staging a deliberate retreat, drawing the cataphracts from their infantry support. Letting heat and armor do what Roman swords alone couldn't: exhaust them. Letting heat and armor do what Roman swords alone couldn't: exhaust them. Then Aurelian's forces turned and cut them down.
Festus and Eutropius corroborate the broad outcome: location, cavalry type, decisive Roman victory. Without confirming that specific tactical detail, some scholars debate whether Immae and Daphne were one battle or two.
Whatever the precise mechanics, the result was unambiguous. Zabdas's army was forced to abandon Antioch and fall back toward Emesa. And Aurelian now understood exactly how to beat Palmyra's greatest weapon a second time. If Immae was a warning, Emesa, modern Homs, is where Zenobia's empire actually breaks. Zenobia and Zabdas regrouped with what remained of their field army at Emesa, reportedly drawing on the wealth of the city's great temple to the sun god Elagabal to resupply. In the opening clash, her cataphracts again shattered the Roman cavalry facing them. The same overwhelming strength that had won them the first shock at Immae. This time, in the heat of pursuit, the armored riders scattered out of formation. Roman infantry closed in and cut them down while they were spread thin and vulnerable. Zosimus credits units from Palestine fighting with clubs rather than swords. Treat that maneuver-level detail as narrated account rather than verified fact. What's certain is the outcome: total, decisive defeat. Zenobia retreated first into Emesa, then further, back toward Palmyra itself. Unable even to secure the city's treasury on the way out. The empire that, months earlier, stretched unbroken from Mesopotamia to Anatolia, had, in 2 battles, lost the ability to defend itself at all.
By summer 272, Aurelian's army surrounds Palmyra itself. Not a modest outpost.
one of the wealthiest, best fortified cities in the Roman East, with every reason to hold out. A later, unreliable tradition claims Aurelian wrote demanding surrender, and that Zenobia refused, insisting Persia would come to her aid. Whether or not that exchange happened as described, the strategic logic holds. With her army broken and her city surrounded, Sassanid Persia was her last realistic hope. The same power Odaenathus had spent years fighting. That hope never arrived in time. Zenobia attempted to slip out of the besieged city and reach the Euphrates. She was captured by pursuing Roman cavalry at the river crossing. Caught at the threshold between the empire she had built and the one that might have saved her. Here is where the legend of Zenobia and the historical Zenobia diverge most sharply. The film shouldn't resolve it into one tidy version, because the ancient accounts genuinely disagree. The Historia Augusta claims she was paraded through Rome in Aurelian's triumph, weighed down in golden chains, then pardoned to live as a Roman matron in a villa at Tibur. Zosimus, in one version, has her dying by illness or drowning, crossing the Bosphorus before Rome. John Malalas, later and less reliable, claims she was beheaded at the height of the triumph. Other traditions describe death by starvation. Nearly every dramatic detail traces back to the Historia Augusta. The golden chains, her supposed proud defiance, the source scholars trust least. The more vivid a detail about Zenobia is, the more likely it comes from that source. The more famous she becomes, the harder the real woman is to actually see. Before the verdict, the tally, stripped of narrative, everything provable by coin, inscription, or territory. By the time Rome moved against her, Zenobia's regime controlled Egypt, Syria, and Arabia, and territory reaching deep into Anatolia. Her son held the title Augustus. She held Augusta. Their mints struck imperial coinage in their own names. Their armies had defeated Roman forces in open battle and occupied some of the wealthiest provinces the empire had. And it took the reigning emperor of Rome, personally, at the head of an army, to end it. She hadn't simply become powerful inside Rome's system. She had reached the point where Rome had to decide whether to destroy her or accept a second empire in the East. Strip away the legend, and that scorecard is what the evidence alone supports. Not a legend's exaggeration, but what coins, inscriptions, and territory can actually prove. Independent of any single dramatized source. Whether she is history's most powerful queen has no clean answer. Power can't be measured fairly across 16 centuries and entirely different kinds of states. Measured against what a regional client ruler built from one desert city in under 3 years. Against an empire that would have to stop her or split in two. The case is genuinely stronger than most people, outside specialists, have ever heard. Rome wasn't the only culture that reshaped her story. Arabic memory preserved a parallel queen, Al-Zabba, who avenges her father against a tribal rival and commands no empire. And dies by her own hand rather than in captivity. Some modern Syrian historians propose this as a hypothesis, not settled fact. That this legend's timing sits suspiciously close to Zenobia's real reign. Two originally separate stories,
merged over centuries because they shared one theme.
A formidable desert woman, undone by a male aggressor.
Zenobia lost her empire, but she may have gained something stranger.
A second life inside a completely different culture's memory. Where history and legend fused into one queen remembered two different ways. Palmyra's political power was crushed within a year. Aurelian showed mercy once, then none after a second revolt.
But the city and the memory survived. Through the Byzantine centuries, through 1,000 years of travelers.
Through modern war that left temples and the monumental arch in wreckage. A UNESCO World Heritage Site still listed as endangered, with restoration begun and far from finished. She was powerful enough that the question is still worth asking 17 centuries later. She's famous enough that the real woman and the legend may never be fully pulled apart. The coins still exist. The map still has a shape. Rome still had to send an emperor. Maybe that, in the end, is the truest measure of power a queen can leave behind.